This is gonna be a long one, so bear with me. To start this off, I should make it known that I'm a 17-year-old girl who's currently working at her first job. For the sake of privacy, I'll be referring to myself by my nickname, B. The story could be seen as a typical restaurant horror story, but due to the events of the story lasting for a few days, it would be technically a stalker story, I believe. The restaurant I work at is called Outback. For those who are unfamiliar with the restaurant, it's an Australian-themed steakhouse. The story took place in December of last year, 2023. I'll go ahead and give you a bit of a layout of my restaurant. As soon as you walk into the building, right in front of you is the host stand. To the left is the waiting section, which has some booth seats to sit on, and behind the host stand is the bar section, where there are booths surrounding the bar top. To the right of the host stand is the entrance to the main dining area, and that is partly blocked off by a pony wall. This means that in the booth directly next to the door, you can't see people sitting in the seats against the pony wall very well from the host stand unless you poke your head around. This will be very important later on in the story. So the night this took place, I happened to be the closing hostess for the night, meaning that I was the one who was in charge of locking the door after 11 p.m., which is when we close on the weekends. My fellow hostess had just left about an hour before this situation took place, so I was the only person at the host stand for the whole rest of the night. It was around 10:40-ish, so we were less than 30 minutes until closing, meaning we were really slow. We were down to closing front of the house staff, and there were only around 4 tables with people left, and all of them had their food. So the servers were hanging out in the kitchen with the cooks, only occasionally coming back up front to check on their customers. I myself was getting pretty hungry around this time, as I came straight to work after school, so I hadn't ate dinner yet at all. With no customers coming in at the moment, I went to the back and grabbed some bread and a drink, bringing it up to the host stand with me. I ate for a bit while scrolling through my phone until movement caught my eye. 2 people were entering the building. I turned off my phone and immediately put my box of bread into a shelf built into the host stand. When I looked up to greet the customers, I could immediately tell that something was off. To start off, one of them was wearing a balaclava. For those who don't know what that is, it's a type of face covering that only allows you to see the person's eyes. In other words, I couldn't see this man's face. The other one just had a bandana over his hair. They were both wearing pretty bulky jackets, but even under those, I could see their fidgety movements. The shorter of the 2 walked up to me and said something. I had asked him to repeat himself because his voice was slurred. I assumed that they were likely high or drunk based off their body language and the lingering scent stuck on them. After repeating himself a couple of times, I finally understood what he was saying. He was asking to order takeout. Now, we have a specific room for takeout located towards the back of the restaurant right by the kitchen entrance. I gave them both my typical customer service smile and began to tell them to go ahead and head back there, but the one that spoke to me then cut me off. He had asked me for a couple of menus so they could look at the menu right then. This isn't an uncommon request, so I gave it to them without much thought, assuming they would take it with them to the to-go room. What I wasn't expecting was for them to sit down right there up by the host stand to view the menu. While this wasn't a huge deal, how they chose to sit was sending alarm bells off in my head. One chose to sit in the seats right beside the host stand, and the other chose to sit in the empty booth right beside the door, aka the closest seats to my stand. Call me paranoid, but I'm a young female who's had plenty of bad encounters in the past. So yeah, this was giving me a bad feeling. They remained there for a little bit, not speaking. Anytime a customer got up and left, I noticed how the taller, quiet one would stand up and look around the dining area and then sit back down, almost as if examining who was left. He literally did this each time someone left, and he seemed to be growing more agitated by each minute. I considered going to grab a manager, But since these men had not technically done anything wrong, I didn't know what I could even tell the manager. Trying to distract myself from the uncomfortable feeling, I had decided to fold some kids' menus. Unfortunately, my bread box was in the way of the menus, so I had to move it aside. I guess the men heard the styrofoam box move, because the one who spoke to me earlier then looked up at me and just smiled. It wasn't a good smile either. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it made my stomach drop just seeing it. He asked me if the food was good here. I kinda just paused at the question. Like, you were here to order food, so shouldn't you know? I just forced a smile and said yes. He stared at me silently after that, so I averted my gaze and did my best to ignore him. This lasted all for 2 minutes before he spoke up again. Once again, I didn't understand him, so I asked him to repeat himself. Still unable to hear him, I stupidly step around my stand to get a bit closer to hear.
Do you have an Insta?
Is what he asked. I blanked. This is the part where I should have just lied and said no. But without thinking, I automatically gave my normal response for whenever this question was asked. Yeah, but I'm only 17, sir. To which he then replied,
Oh, that's fine. I'm only 19 myself.
Now, while I don't judge people who swap social medias with older people, I have a personal rule for myself to never give social media to anyone outside of my high school age while I myself am still a student. I find it makes it much easier to avoid creeps that way. But unfortunately for me, I'm also a pretty non-confrontational person. So I didn't want to just outright say that, nor just outrightly say no. I really should have though. So hesitantly, I just gave him a thin smile and then said, Oh, well, I have a boyfriend. Which actually wasn't a lie. Normally, if my age response doesn't deter men off, then my boyfriend response does. So it was to my discomfort when all he did was raise an eyebrow at me, and then replied with,
Well, it's not like I'm asking for your number. It's only an Insta.
Yeah, like the app that's specifically designed to post photos and stories on is much better than a phone number. I felt like a deer in the headlights. This is where I made the main mistake that I still kick myself for to this day. Begrudgingly, I opened up my Insta and handed my phone to him. I still don't know why I did that. It was stupid of me. The one thing I'm thankful for to this day is that I never post nor save stories. So all the info he could get from my Insta was from my profile picture and my followers and following lists. I watched him type in his account and press follow off my phone and then hand it back to me. Then I quickly returned to my stand to avoid further conversation. I was feeling pretty uneasy now. As he had been doing for the past few minutes, every time a person got up to leave, the quiet men would get up and look around and then sit back down, looking more and more agitated each time. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, I had felt a tap on my shoulder, causing me to turn around. Behind me was the closing busser, who for the sake of this story I'll call Hannah. Now, Hannah is one of my friends from school who I met during sophomore year, and I had actually helped her to apply to work at the restaurant. So I was immediately put a little at ease by her presence. We talked quietly for a couple of minutes until she mentioned one of our old servers who left previously had come back to visit for a few minutes and he was in the kitchen. I got excited hearing this, as he and I had a pretty good friendship during his time serving at the restaurant. So, checking to make sure that no one else was coming in, I quickly walked to the kitchen to visit for a minute. After giving him a hug and talking for a couple of minutes, I then headed back up towards my host stand. As I was passing the bar, I see Hannah get called over by the last people who were sitting at the bar top, an older couple. I see the woman point at me, and I mentally roll my eyes, figuring that she was likely complaining about me leaving my stand and duties. I paid her no mind and just returned to my spot. I wasn't even there for 1 minute before suddenly I felt someone grab my shoulder. Startled, I turned to see Hannah standing behind me, her face ashen. I immediately became alarmed and I tried to ask her what was wrong, but she just shook her head and then motioned for me to follow her, which I did. We walked to the bar and then she leaned in to whisper to me, "Don't drink or eat any of the stuff you have up there." The woman at the bar saw that man with the bandana tamper with your drink while you were in the kitchen. I felt my blood turn cold hearing this. I must have just stood there staring at her blankly because then she added, "The man was reaching for your bread box next when he looked up and saw her staring at him." She said that he just gave her a smile and sat back down. At this point, I could feel myself shaking just slightly. I had known something was very wrong with those men, but I never expected them to tamper with my shit while I walked away just for a couple of minutes. I don't know why I didn't go get a manager right then. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just gave Hannah a nod and then thanked her before hesitantly returning to my stand. I stood there for a few minutes in silence, just feeling my heart pounding in my chest as I avoided eye contact with either of the men. I didn't touch the food or the drink. Soon after 10:55 p.m., the last table eating paid their tab and left, causing the quiet man to stand up and look around again. The only people left were the old couple at the bar. I guess this caused the man to lose his patience. He then said something that I couldn't understand, stood up, and walked out of the front door, slamming it behind him. And I mean, he slammed it. I never even knew the door could be that loud shutting. I stood there in stunned silence before I heard the bartender then call out to me. I'll call him Dante for this story. He's a tall man in his 50s with a son just a couple of years younger than me. He called out to me, smiling humorously, as he had asked me if some guy just stormed out. I take this as my opportunity to quickly walk back towards the bar. I lean in close and then tell him the situation. These two guys are up there and they won't leave. One guy harassed me to give him my Insta, and the lady at the bar said she saw him tampering with my drink. All humor drained from his face as he heard this, now taking on a much more serious look and an authoritative voice. He stepped out of the bar and called into the kitchen for the safety manager and one of the male servers. There was a small group of employees who had clocked out for the night, relaxing in some of the booths and in the closed section by the kitchen, and the manager told me to stay put there with them. From there, I watched as the three men approached the lone man up front. They didn't even make it to him before he quickly stood up and then left. I guess seeing them intimidated him into leaving. After he left, my manager walked back to me and then he took the keys from me so he could lock the door, telling me to clock out for the night. Feeling shaken up, I did exactly as he said. I went to go thank the older couple before I left for the night, and I found out the reason they had stayed behind so late was because the men had also gave them a bad feeling as well, and they were watching over me. Turns out the older gentleman happened to be a retired cop, so he gave me a stern talking to about stranger safety. I really wish that was the end of the story, but unfortunately it wasn't. That same night I went into my Insta and ensured to block the guy, thinking that the situation was over now. The next morning though, I woke up with a follow request from a newly made account. I didn't recognize the man from the profile picture, but after looking at his posts, I had noticed something sketchy. His 3 posts aligned with the same exact time that he had requested to follow me, and he had also followed a couple of my friends from my old school. I sent them both a message asking if they knew him, but they both denied it, claiming he had requested to follow them both around the same time he tried to follow me. I took screenshots of his account and posts and then ignored it for a few hours. I figured this may be the account of the man who was wearing the balaclava that night. I later checked on the account again to block him, and I found he had removed his profile picture, all his posts, and he even cleared out his following and followers list. I blocked him and went about my day. All was quiet until the next weekend. I was the second to last host to leave that night. Clocking out, I went up front to talk to my coworker. I happened to be taking Hannah home that night, so I had to wait for about half an hour for her to clock out so we could leave. Arriving at the stand, I had started to talk to my fellow host until something caught my eye. Remember how I mentioned that it can be hard to see anyone sitting in the booth right beside the door due to the pony wall? Yeah. Well, that's why it surprised me to see shoes sticking out from the booth. I peeked around the corner for a second and immediately felt my blood run cold. Sitting there was a man wearing a bulky jacket and a balaclava. Turning back to my coworker, I asked her if she knew who he was. She just gave me a confused look and said that he was probably one of the kitchen workers waiting on his ride. I doubted that, but I just said okay and sat down in the waiting area closest to the host stand. Hannah soon joins me up front, and as we grab our bags to leave, we then see someone come through the front door. Both her and I froze as we recognized the man with the bandana from the previous night. I looked at Hannah, and we came to a silent agreement. She walked towards the kitchen as I walked back up to my coworker and then quietly instructed her to grab her car keys, phone, and anything else that's valuable. It looked like she was about to question me, but I guess she could see the panic in my face because she grabbed her stuff and then followed me without saying anything. As we walked towards the kitchen, out comes 3 of our managers, all of them making a beeline towards the front. Seeing them, the quiet one immediately yelled something out that sounded like,
"Damn it, man!"
Then he left, slamming the door again. The more talkative one stayed and spoke to one of the managers for a brief moment before she inevitably ended up telling him to leave. They tried coming back one other time I was there, but one of the managers was watching the door and was there in a heartbeat before I could even fully process the situation. He had followed them out that time and proceeded to yell at them outside the restaurant. I don't know what he threatened them with, but I never saw them again after this. I actually found out later from my dad, who had picked me up that night and had talked to a police officer that happened to be in the area, that the police were trying to shut down an illegal club right down the street that same week. They suspected that those 2 men had been coming from there each time they had come to the restaurant. I don't know what exactly they wanted from me, but with how they kept coming back, messing with my drink, and trying to follow me on social media despite being blocked, whatever it was wasn't going to be a good thing. The restaurant got a call a week later that I answered. On the other end of the line, it was silent, so I asked if anyone was there, which I got the reply,
"Hey, do you know who I am?"
When I answered no, the guy then asked,
"Well, do you want to guess?"
To which I hung up on. I don't know if the call was related to the men, but I wasn't taking any chances. Moral of the story: to any young employees or any employees at all, if something doesn't feel right or your safety feels threatened, do not hesitate to get help. And never ever give your personal information or contacts to strangers, no matter what they say. Learn how to say no and stick with it. Please be safe out there, y'all. There's some really crazy people in this world. When I was 18 and freshly broken up with my way older boyfriend, I basically went crazy with dating guys. At the time, I also dressed very goth, even going as far as to wear a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, my friend and roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre skinny white guy who clearly was a little alternative, but it was hard to tell really with the uniform. We had joked about me leaving my phone number on the receipt or something, so I hyped myself up, and I did so. Later that night, he had sent me a text. We had talked for a few days, never really having a right time to meet up, as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned that the boots he wore meant a lot to him, and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes. One really late night coming home, I was texting and driving, as any 18-year-old does, and we decided to meet up. My stupid self invited him over to my apartment where it was just me and the roommate who had been with me before. Our other 2 roommates were not home yet. At first, it was fine because I was already drunk, so I would just let him rant about whatever he wanted. He kind of just went on and on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, and more. Eventually, he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was just like, sure, why not? He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also that he had multiple badly covered up Nazi tattoos. One was just slightly covered with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I had simply decided the best way to deal with this situation was to appease him, so I just went along with it casually. I don't remember exactly every detail because it was over 2 years ago and I was drunk. But he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and I tried to call his bluff, saying I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy ass room, he had pulled his gun on me yet again, saying he wanted to do it with it out. I got mad and I had tried to fight him off me and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he had hit me in the arm with it, which that shit really hurt because it was a nice one. When I finally got him off of me and he realized I was pissed, not scared, he had started acting like a crackhead, saying I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me. He ran off, jumped the fence of the apartment complex, and not even taking his car that he had come in. In the morning, his car was gone, and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. While to me it's a funny story, I do now realize how bad it could have ended up. So to the crazy ass waiter from the Japanese restaurant, I don't think I want to see you again. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibal.stories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone. And remember to always